everybody. Today we are going to discuss disabilities caused by violence. I hope you are having a great time in summer and in the classes. So today, learning objectives. At the end of this class, you will be able to define violence, identify disabilities caused by any kind of violence, and recognize disabilities caused by intimate partner violence and child marriage. We are going to discuss definition of violence, injury and disabilities, disabilities caused by war and caused by intimate partner violence and child marriage. Accidents, natural disasters, wars, and violence produces injuries that result in the following disabilities: physical and cognitive limitations, paralysis due to, for example, spinal cord trauma, partial or complete amputation of limbs, physical limb deformation resulting in mobility impairments, post-traumatic stress disorder or psychological trauma that could lead to suicide or other worse situations related with psychological trauma, sensory disabilities such as blindness and deafness, permanent and complete functional loss of the genitourinary organ such as hypogonadism, which is when the cells glands are unable to produce or produce lethal hormones, infertility and voiding and erectile dysfunctions. So violence is preventable, and this is a very nice figure that people in the civil society and the World Health Organization are promoting prevention of violence in every area of the human lives, such as schools, churches, clubs, everything. So the World Health Organization is working and implemented prevention matters that we are going to discuss in our last class. But violence accounts for 1.5 million deaths per year. 4,000 people are killed every day globally. And of course, this is a significant public health issue, human rights and human development problem. Violence and injury. Worldwide, more than 1 billion people live with disability. More than 1 billion people are living with any kind of disability. An important proportion of this disability are caused by injury, produced by different factors. For example, traffic crashes is one, and that is related to alcohol consumption and drug abuse, etc. But violence is a very important factor. Child abuse, youth violence, intimate partner violence, wars, and conflict. 1/4 of disabilities may be caused by injury and violence. The lack of data reflecting the violence-related injuries at global level are hindering to know the current status or burden of disabilities due to violence. These are some violent facts. Suicide and homicide account for more than 80% of violence-related deaths. Of those killed by violence, over 50% are because of suicide. Over 35% because of injuries inflicted intentionally by another person. Over 11% as a direct result of war or some other form of collective violence. So this is a very, very interesting status and figures, and you can see here suicide caused over 50% of deaths and related to violence. Violence disproportionately impact young and economically productive people. So youth are having problems, economical problems. They don't have opportunities in their life. So there is an increase of violence among this group of this society. For example, globally, men aged 15 to 44 years are more likely to die from homicide and suicide. For every young person killed by violence, an estimated 20 to 40 receive injuries that require hospital treatment. Among people under 25, for every suicide, 100 young people attempt to take their own life. This is a very, very critical situation because we are talking about young people under 25 years of age. So if you see one suicide, remember that for one suicide, another 100 young people attempt to take their own life. So here you can see the map of the world that shows intentional homicide per 100,000 people. And you can see here the heavy burden that occurred in Central America, Caribbean, and part of South America. And then you can see the distribution in other places. Africa probably is the second, and Asia the third one. But Latin America, especially Central America, Caribbean, and the north of South America are very heavily impacted. Also here we account Mexico, as you can see in this figure. And these are 2013 data, which is very, very recent data. So this slide is showing us the ranking levels of violence worldwide. And this is a report from WHO. And you can see here comparing injuries with infectious diseases, especially HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. The number of dead people who die because of injury is about 5.8 million dying each year, and these account for 10% of the world's death, and 32 more than the number of people dying for malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV combined. This is a very, very huge problem. And in this table, you can see that those countries under the red box, they show a rate of 20% more per 100 population here in the compared with the other countries. So here you can see, for example, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Colombia. Those countries are considered one of the highest violence countries in the world today. So this injury pyramid shows that how injuries treated outside the health system or not treated or not reported resulted in injuries visiting primary healthcare facilities, or injuries resulting in visit to emergency department, or in hospitalization, or injuries that led to fatal injuries. Um, the millions of deaths that occur because of injuries is very, very small. If we compare to the tens of millions of people who suffer injuries that led to permanent or temporal disability. So those who survive could become disabled, either permanent or temporal. So, and here are some of the facts of violence that showed you that injuries are a leading killer of youth. So for people between 5 to 45, injuries are one of the top three causes of death, which is very, very important. Um, so, uh, so this is a dramatic situation that require attention and also create a worldwide public health problem. Here, if you can see the worldwide leading causes of death from 2004 and the projections of 2030, you can see here we include injuries caused by traffic crash, suicide, and homicide. They are already included here, but they are going to be increasing and moving to the top by 2030. For example, here El Salvador data in 2008. El Salvador, along with Honduras, are considered, and Guatemala, are considered one of the three of the highest countries in violence, that suffer violence worldwide. You can see here these leading causes of death by sex in El Salvador. Number one, assault with firearm, specific or unspecific. For men, is more than 2,000, and also for women here. So this is the total. So this is the highest cause of death, okay? And then we have, for example, motor or non-motor vehicle accidents are the other one. But number one is violence. The consequences of injury and violence. Violence and any other situation like road traffic crashes, burns, poisoning, drawing falls, etc., led to physical injuries, mental consequences, behavioral change, STD, unwanted pregnancy, etc. But this also is leading to death and disability, and of course suicide here, which is related to death. But disability are very important because all of these situations, all of these health issues will cause disability, and this is what this class is also about. How violence and injury are creating important disabilities. And here is a table, a worldwide table of nature of unintentional injuries sustained by children under 15 years old. And you can see here intracranial injury, short-term, open wound. So these are problems related, number one, number two, and number three, for example, related with injuries. And you can continue here looking at the consequences and the type of injuries that children are receiving due to any kind of violence. So the injury severity and estimated long-term effects of unintentional injury among children that are going to emergency department, for example, in these four countries, Bangladesh, Colombia, Egypt, and Pakistan, you can see here, are producing some of them here, you can see permanent disability for especially road, road traffic, long-term also temporary or short-term temporary disability. So we are having this situation, and this is the rate of unintentional injury per 100,000 children in different regions and by country income. And you can see here the heaviest burden is in Africa and some countries in Eastern Mediterranean and Southeastern Asia. So Africa is the hardest hit for this situation, following by Southeast Asia and then Eastern Mediterranean also. And high-income countries are not free of this kind of situation. Road traffic injuries among children, as you can see here, these are the most important problems that they have, fractures, etc., that could lead to disabilities. Wars and disabilities. This is a very recent picture of the war in Ukraine, 2014, and the civil war still is going on at this point. But you can see here in this dramatic picture the destruction of infrastructure, and of course this produce disability, this produce death of thousands of people. So what is armed conflict? Definitions, level of intensity, and types. An armed conflict is a contested incompatibility that concerns government and or territory where the use of armed force between two parties, of which at least one is the government of a state, result in at least 25 battle-related deaths. So this is a definition from the World Bank. And then there is another definition apart from armed conflict, which is non-state conflict. It's also the use of force between two organized groups that is not the government or the state, but also result in 25 deaths. And there are two levels of intensity. Minor conflict is considered that in which 25 to 999 people die. War is considered when more than 1,000 people die. And the types of armed conflict: internal or civil war, internalized internal army conflict with external intervention, interstate armed conflict, extra-systemic conflicts, or colonial war, for example. Anyway, but the most important here is that any war, regardless of any kind of involvement, which is short one or long one, that create a really a big burden of deaths and disabilities. As you see here, this is a trend of violent conflicts worldwide since 46 to 2008. And you can see here the internal conflicts have been, uh, more or less stable, and then interstate countries the same, some of them going down, but then internal armed conflicts or civil wars are increasing, and the number of violence conflict total, as you can see, increasing by time. So here is 2008 with so the Ukraine war is not included here, or other wars that are going on. The same here, the Americas had a very large burden from 46 to 2006, and you can see here um, Asia, Africa, and Europe are also included here. Also, the violent facts. 90% of deaths due to violence occur in low and middle income countries. Countries with higher levels of economic inequality tend to have higher violence or death due to violence. And this is because people are, neglected in terms of socioeconomic condition, lack of education, lack of opportunity. So young people, at least in these poor countries, they tend to join gangs and criminal organizations. So poverty and the lack of access to health, to education, to all opportunities are conditions that could lead to violence. So we see in countries the highest death rate among people living in the poorest communities. So those are the ones that are targeted from criminal organizations. They recruit them to be members, offering a new way of life, and then the violence cycle continue. And then, for example, nowadays in Central America and Mexico, narco-traffickers are playing a very important role, recruiting poor people, especially youth, offering them a new way of life and easy money to earn. And so if they refuse, they also are killed. So this is a terrible situation that the people are confronting. So this map shows you the wars and minor conflicts that have been occurring from 1999 to 2008. So you can see here in red one are the war with more than 1,000 deaths, and in orange you would see minor conflict in which 25 to 995 people have died. But this situation is increasing at this point. So, wars and disabilities in recent world. So, according to the Institute of Medicine of the United States, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, 2001-2014, has killed 6,700 soldiers, but there are more than 50,000 that are wounded, and they could become disabled. And this situation occurs because there is a new weapon that is called improvised explosive device, IED, which has led to blast injury landscape, totally different from previous wars. So that create terrible injuries in our soldiers, and they continue, they come back, and they are disabled, and they have to receive the proper treatment, the proper rehabilitation resources. So here you can see in this graphic that we have a blast, for example, of this type, target different part of our body that create this kind of injuries: musculoskeletal, dermal, digestive, genitalia, and also visual and ocular, visual, central nervous system, auditory problem also. So, and that create just an injury in the brain, create problems in the whole body. For example, motor weakness, Boyden dysfunctions, change in auditory processing abilities, visual symptoms, etc. So that could lead to severe permanent brain damage. So the use of the IED device in this war has changed the injury scene from the prior US wars, according to the Institute of Medicine in 2004. And you can see these blast explosions produce supersonic wave of intense air pressure that follow detonation of any explosive device. This could lead to fatal injuries with or without external signs of trauma. It could be multi-traumatic injuries, blast lung, hearing loss, ear trauma, other neurological and emotional issues that may appear later, such as any kind of mental or distress problems, and other signs, external signs could occur, also amputation, etc. So as you can see here in this graphic, is the ratio of wounded death numbers in different wars. And you can see here from the American Revolution, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, etc. So there's a huge difference in the current situation due to these new weapons that are producing this kind of blast. So we have, by last year, more than 200,000 soldiers who received traumatic brain injury in those wars, and that, as we mentioned before, it create problems, mechanical tissue injuries leading to hemorrhage, etc., systemic response due to vascular loading and dysfunction, and cerebral response due to all these injuries that could lead to simultaneous and systematic problems in your whole body, because of the brain is involved in directing the whole body. So the wars. These devices are responsible for about 75% of all military casualties. And the major pattern is number one, they cause the blast. Second, caused by fragments or debris. Third, due to acceleration of body parts of the body by the blast wave. You see here, the body is pushed by the weight. Number four, all the injuries produces burns, toxic substance exposure, psychological trauma. And number five, illness or disease resulted from chemical, all the chemical, biological, and radiological substances originated by a bomb explosion. So we have all these patterns depending on at what level the soldier was during the explosion. So you can have all of these different situations. So the civilian casualties also are increasing in every war. From the 90s war, more than 90% are civilian casualties. So this is another important element that we need to consider when we are addressing public health interventions in war situations. We need to take into account the civilian casualties. In modern wars, according to the Columbia Law School of Human Rights Clinic, this study was conducted and showed how the civilians are killed with using the drone strike in civilian population. And you can see here, it's a very, very large numbers, and we don't have too much information about this. So let's move now to another important factor of cause of violence and how violence are creating also disabilities, especially related with gender issues. So this video will show you, it's a very strong video, and will show you some example that women face in relationship where IPV.
I went to the bank today. Where's the money, Kieran? Tell me what you did with it.
I spent it.
That money was mine, you bitch. You had no right.
खर्च किया. Food for your sons. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤੇ ਗੋਰੀ ਰੰਡੇ ਦਾ ਖਰਚ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ.
What if I fucked up that pretty face you're so proud of? Then you'd learn. This is my house. It's my money. If I want to spend it on other women, I will. If I want to poke out those pretty eyes, I'll do that too. Who's going to stop me? You? You're a woman. You're nothing. You're a cunt. Less than nothing.
But what is the definition? Intimate partner violence is any physical, sexual, or psychological harm, injury caused by a current or former partner, either male or female. Yes, also male are victims of IPV, but there is very little information about it. Number one, because of stigma, they feel ashamed to denounce, and number two, because also they have the lowest incidence and prevalence of this situation, okay? But IPV could be related or not to any kind of sexual involvement. Intimate partners include current or former spouses, either from the opposite sex or same sex. Opposite sex and same sex cohabiting partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, dates also are part of this situation. The IPV risk factor for a perpetrator and a victim, you can see here for a perpetrator, attitude accepting of violence and gender inequalities, abuse during childhood or witness violence in the family, alcohol and drug abuse, and low education. Let's see the risk factor for the victim. Attitude accepting violence and gender inequalities, maybe because of family dynamic, maybe because culture, maybe because she or he lives in a situation where this IPV will occur during childhood. Exposure to abuse during childhood, witnessing violence between parents, and low education. So the IPV global figures, according to the WHO, the women who suffer IPV report higher rates of low birth weight baby, in 16% more than 50% as likely to have an abortion, almost 50% are likely to experience depression, 1.5 times more likely to acquire HIV, and 7% of women have been sexually assaulted by someone other than a partner. So, other person on the street, on the bar, anyone, any criminal assault are also part of this. Women who have experienced this form of violence are 2.3 times more likely to have alcohol use disorders and 2.6 times more likely to have depression or anxiety. So the intimate partner violence pathway according to the World Health Organization, and you can see here, for example, physical trauma led to injuries in all these areas of your body, and this led to disability. Okay, psychological trauma, stress led to mental health problem, post-traumatic disorder, anxiety, depression, eating disorder, suicide, ideation, for example, substance abuse, non-communicable diseases also, and somatoforms of chronic diseases like this, and this can lead to disability or death, to homicide, suicide, and other. Now, fear and control is another pattern that could lead to limited sexual and reproductive control, for example, unsafe sex. So people are, their partner are obligating them to have sex without protection, for example, lack of contraception, healthcare seeking, lack of autonomy. You are not going to the clinic because I don't want to. And this led to perinatal and maternal health, affecting the baby and affecting also the women, or losing, the pregnancy by abortion, etc. Sexual and reproductive health, not only abortion and unwanted pregnancy, but also other sexually transmitted infection, gynecological problem, and also these can lead to death, homicide, suicide, and other. So this is the circle of the victims that are suffering from intimate partner violence. And you can see here, this table shows the lifetime prevalence of physical or sexual intimate partner among ever partner women by region. You can see that Africa has the highest, one of the highest burden of in prevalence, and then we have Eastern Mediterranean countries, and we have following but southeastern, uh, Southeast Asia.